And again, I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm just going to give their names and positions. If you can check the program for the full bios, that would be great. Move this up a bit. So on my left, Mary Dean Barringer, who's the Strategic Initiative Director for the Council for Chief State School Officers. After that is Andy Coons, Senior Director, Center for Great Public Schools at the National Education Association. Karen Cator is the President and CEO of Digital Promise, which works in improving education through technology. Charmaine Mercer is an education researcher and policy advisor here in DC, which was formerly with the Alliance for Excellence in Education. And Seth, Gerson, who was Director of Government Relations for the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. So as we mentioned, we want to get back, building on the teachers' perspectives, to get into a little bit of the policy framework behind this and discuss some of the data that we heard earlier. So I want to start by pointing out, as they mentioned, as both Randy and Andreas mentioned, the TALIS survey, it was released last year, found that U.S. teachers tend to be considerably less positive about professional development, about the effectiveness of it, than their international colleagues. And I just want to get a perspective from you as policymakers. Why do you think that is? In your view, what is the central systemic or philosophical cause for this situation? Why are we battling this year after year? Anyone want to have Seth? Yeah.
I think one thing I was just struck by both the speakers and the panelists is that there was really the focus on professional development and ways it could be improved, and I wouldn't disagree with any of those pieces in terms of job embedded or team-based and focused on content and the intersection between the two. But I think it's taking a step back and really taking a look at how is professional development or professional learning situated in the entire professional continuum? How are we preparing and developing teachers right from the beginning, and what are those habits of mind that you're developing? So there's a through line from first day of preparation to accomplished practice. So they've done this in medicine, and in medicine you have 80% or so of doctors board certified, and you have board certification in education, but unfortunately only 3% of teachers are. And the reason for that is not because in medicine they mandated in any way that board certification you had to have board certification, but that from that first day of medical school you were developing those habits of mind. So by the time you sat, it was the expectation, it was the norm that you would become board certified, that you'd be an accomplished practitioner. And I think if we think about it in that way, we heard a lot of this was new for teachers, this kind of professional development. But again, I think it's taking that step back and saying from the beginning, we need to look at the whole system and how you're developing and preparing teachers right from that first day of preparation.
Okay. Mary Dean, did you have something to say?
So I heard two different conversations, and it depended when we talked about professional development, and the conversation switched when we talked about learning. And so I think generally, teachers are dissatisfied when professional development is this external, something else that we have to do, and not necessarily seen as core to the work of learning. But all of the teachers, when they talked about times that they took advantage of their own learning, there was a spark, an enthusiasm, and an excitement there. So I think that there's a lesson here around when we have teachers like the ones that we just heard, who somehow come to this habit of mind that they're agents of their own learning, and that they sort of are, feel some efficacy to, support learning, direct their own learning. You get a very different reaction to the value of learning and supporting teaching. And I think that that's where I'm really intrigued about how can policy honor and support and recognize the expertise in learning that teachers acquire, and then think about the way that we also better utilize that expertise that's developed.
Yeah, Charmaine?
I think I would add as well that there's a disconnect between what teachers believe they need versus what's being offered, right? So somewhat to Emily's point, like wanting content and wanting to really be able to focus on the craft and getting to, again, to the point about learning, like how do we continue to learn and what's needed? So as long as there's that disconnect between what's needed and what's being offered, I think you're always going to have this problem. I liked hearing Randy's statement, I believe she was saying about the schools in New York, where once they hit a certain threshold, the school was able to determine what they offered and how they offered it based on the need. I mean, things that professional development, professional learning communities need to be reflective of a need. They shouldn't just be offered as though they're detached from everything else that's going on around them. They have to be contextual. So trying to close that gap between what is being offered and what is needed, I think could help get us there.
Is there a secret to that, or is there? I mean,
I don't know. Maybe ask. That's probably a blessed place to start. Is
Right.
figuring out. But I do believe in lots of instances once administrators are acquiring that information. So even Emily said when she gets the survey back and she did all the right
Right.
things going in, it's like, oh, this sucked, right? So then
Right.
what do you do? And having the ability to pivot in a meaningful way sometimes requires heavier lifts in certain instances.
yeah, Andy.
The only thing I'd add to what has already been said, I agree completely with the disconnect, with PD that is imposed versus PD that has meaning for the teachers. We know that best practices for PD are that it's sustained, it's not a quick drop, that folks are able to dig deeply into the content and the skills that they need. We also know it's iterative, that it's grounded in the needs of the students, and you're looking at data, you're looking in testing practices in your classroom. The last thing I think I would add is NE has been involved since 2007 with a new teacher center and doing a TELS survey that really dovetails well with the TALIS. And we learned from that survey that around professional development, that teachers, they will tell us that their PD is aligned with school improvement practices. They will tell us that they're encouraged to reflect. But again and again, we hear that it is not aligned to, it's not differentiated for their individual needs. And so they can't differentiate and pass it on to the individual needs of their students.
So that theme has come up a couple times today. A related question, going back to all this discussion about the collaborative cultures in schools, and in the TALIS survey, it found that teachers in the U.S. tend to be way more isolated, to feel more isolated, and not have as much time for observation of other teachers or collaborative planning. And we've been hearing this for a long time about U.S. schools, going back to discussion of the 8th grade culture in schools. So I wanted to ask you, why is it so hard for U.S. schools to break out of this mold? We're seeing all this talk about how important collaboration is. We're seeing the data, but a lot of schools still seem to be stuck in the same mold. Karen, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it is interesting. Number one, I tend to see the glass as half full. I think there are some amazing examples of collaboration happening all over the place. I'm heading off to the ISTE conference next week, and there aren't just people talking in panels and presentations. There are spaces everywhere for meetups and connections and sharing of practices. Lots of social media and collaboration on Twitter and all over the place. So there's tons of learning happening, and I will say that probably everybody going there, it's extremely personalized. They're finding what they need, they're finding people they can connect with. So the connectivity and the connections across the collaborations happening are actually pretty amazing. And if we could have the last panel back up, I would love to sort of get some examples of the best collaborations that they have found. So I think part of it is our lens is, if we think about teaching, everyone goes to this mental model of closed doors and classrooms and boxes and, oh yeah, I don't collaborate. But on the other hand, there's a crazy amount of interaction and collaboration with students, with interaction with students, understanding what they need. So if we think about students as teachers, about their own needs and their own learning, if we think about teachers connecting with each other, there's a lot of collaboration. That said, if people are reporting that there's not collaboration, I think we need to analyze that and figure out, is it true, or is it perception, or are there missed opportunities, or what exactly is going on? But I think there's a lot we can learn from seeing the kinds of things that are happening now.
Yeah. Yes, Seth?
I would just say, in terms of one of the keys with collaboration is, and especially in teaching, is building those collaborative cultures from the beginning of a teacher's career. And again, when you look back at that medical model, that it's inculcated in that sense that you're coming in as part of a residency, and you're coming in as a cohort, and you have all the same habits of mind, you have the same dispositions, and then you're just growing those skills and knowledge. And there are residency programs out there right now, some of that are working very well, let's say in Seattle or in Denver, where you are having teachers that are not the teacher of record during that first year. They're under an accomplished mentor for that year, under a teacher of record. And there's this gradual release of responsibility so that they're growing over that year to become the autonomous practitioner that they're ready. And I've seen these up close, and it's pretty amazing to see how those ostensibly first-year teachers, having had that year as a non-teacher of record, are grown and are an autonomous practitioner. And when you compare them to a first-year teacher, no matter how good their preparation program is, are just need that clinical experience in that year to really get the collaborative culture and streamline a mediated entry right into the profession. So.
Yeah, Andy, on collaboration.
Yeah, we hear over and over again that everyone seems to acknowledge the importance of collaboration, but there's just not enough time. And there must be a point when we come together as a profession and say that teacher collaboration cannot be a matter of choice, that this is best practice, this is best for our kids, it's best for our educators. We know it needs to be embedded as part of the daily routine, and that it must be focused on student learning. Collaboration is not about coming around and talking about compliance issues, for example. It's got to be around the student learning. There are some really there's some interesting models out there. We've got extended learning time. That may be a solution. Creative scheduling, staggering schedules. We have examples of that in pockets, but not systemically applied.
Yeah.
Please go on.
I
was thinking, Donald, when you made the comment about, I've been at this 13 years and we're dealing with the same problem. Be my age and be dealing it for, 40 years. I was cleaning out some old files, and actually from my early years at the National Board, and I had this file of a meeting about how are we going to change professional development. And I thought, wow, I'm going to see how far we've come. I'm going to tell you what the issues were that we talked about: finding time, finding funding, and finding ways to break out of the isolation of the class. It's the same issues we're talking about here, and this is 40 years later. So I'm sitting there thinking, you can talk about policy and we can talk about solutions, and that's a short game. I think we need a long game, and I think the long game is we just needed to have a new conversation about what the core business of education is. And I've been wondering about, what if we thought about this as a learning profession? And where the core business when you come to school is about learning for everybody that's in that building. It's the adults and the kids. And would we be having the same conversation about finding time? I don't know, because it would be that it's part of the work. Part of the work is everybody comes there with a different role, but the end game is about learning for the adults and for the students. And I think that might enable us to have some breakthrough thinking around how to get out of some of these, conundrums that we are in, where policy will only just continue to tinker at the margins. And instead of, having 4 professional development days, you might get 6 because we need more time. And that's not it. As long as learning for adults is not considered to be a core part of what teaching is, it will always be an add-on, and it will always be the first thing cut, as Christina said, with professional development, because it's not seen as fundamental to the work that goes on in educating kids and learning as the core business. So I really want to challenge NCTAF to say, you've got this wonderful opportunity to think about, can we have this new conversation to sort of frame some of these persistent issues in a way that could enable some breakthrough thinking on some of these.
But one of the things you heard the teachers saying is that they do have professional development activities that are rewarding, that they are engaged in, but then there's such a lack of time to absorb all that it gets lost. So there are some practical barriers. So how are there ways that schools could be and policymakers and districts could be addressing the matter of time and scheduling?
So what I was trying to articulate, obviously not very well, was that if you really thought about learning as being the fundamental work of schools, then you wouldn't be arguing about a 45-hour day for teachers. You would say, we've got to, make, you begin to address time differently because you then value that. You know that that's part of the work, not about, well, teachers are supposed to be teaching, and so the learning has to be, additional. It is, just synonymous with the instructional practice.
Yeah.
And I was just.
Yeah, no, I got your
yeah,
point. I was just
yeah.
trying to figure out.
And just to not to put too fine a point on it, but I mean, I totally couldn't, I agree with you. And if you think about everything that was said about embedding professional learning and situated, if you have the opportunity to have people in your classroom with you, with your students, that is a learning moment that's happening during the day. It's not messing with schedules. It's like someone comes in, you are learning with your kids, with your colleagues, with a mentor, with someone who can help you in your classroom. That's incredibly powerful in reflecting afterwards. You know, so I think there is time if we think about it differently, but if we perpetuate that the only thing that counts as time as the in-service days and whatever is negotiated into an agreement, like that's your learning time and the rest of the time is your teaching time, it's a crazy conversation and it will perpetuate for the next 40 years if we keep talking about it like that.
Okay, interesting. Charmaine, did you have something?
When you think of this from what kind of structurally or from a policy level can be changed, you certainly want to look at how you're using time, right? So you want to restructure that, and that can come from co-teaching models, right? And it can also come from having teacher leaders, so you have someone who's floating throughout the building and helping to provide that job embedded PD during the school day. I know at my kids' school, for example, every single Wednesday is a half day, and so that gives all the teachers in the building an opportunity to come together. You think about switching, certainly at the secondary school level, you can switch to different types of schedules where students are staying in class for longer periods of time, and you have other by subject matters where they're able to do different things. So I think there's lots of ways that you change time and you change roles of people in the building that can really begin to get you there. So whether it's at the district level or at the principal level, where the principal has the freedom in a given schedule to say, you know, if the district has mandated that it's 7 to 3 or 8 to 4, whatever your schedule is, how that time will be used in any individual school building, I think you begin to see this trickle effect. Again, we want more of this to be systemic versus kind of pockets of excellence, but that's what we should be trying to get to. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have something to add, or?
I like this topic a lot, and I really like your charge. We heard from the audience that, you know, the science teacher who really needs to know the support of early reading skills, and we hear that from our members a lot. We have multiple NEA affiliates are working with extended learning time and thinking about how to collaborate best with their peers during the school day and changing that frame. The other interesting area is several schools that are having teacher-led schools, so that it's not just part of the day, but they're collaborating on everything in those schools. And then as we look at policy and ways to drive change, there are ways through the union contracts. I think of Portland, Maine,
Yeah, I was gonna ask you.
that is their their salary schedule, they've dropped the steps and lanes, and it is based on professional learning of their teachers. So there are opportunities to explore.
Is that happening more often in union contracts?
I see. Yes, it is. Folks are looking
Scheduling and PD hours and that sort of thing?
Yes, yeah, we're seeing that more and more.
Okay. Let's turn to the teacher prep conversation. Seth brought this up earlier. Maybe you could help us get to some of these mindset issues. There's a lot of things going on in teacher prep right now, including the new regs that came out and residency models, as you mentioned. Are there promising initiatives right now, and is it possible that by making major improvements at the teacher prep level, you could improve the context of professional learning for teachers in general by setting this kind of context going forward?
Yeah, I would certainly say so, and I think that's the place to start, because that's where you develop right away. You expose new teachers or prospective teachers to the habits of mind early on, and in that way, you're also deploying expertise, because the faculty in those preparation programs should be accomplished teachers, and up and down the line, that should be the case. And one thing that we've looked at the national board is we have thousands of videos and reflective papers of board certified teachers. How do you get those into the hands of preparation programs where if you're a teacher and you don't have accomplished teaching in your district or in your preparation program, you can see right up close how a board certified teacher, how an accomplished teacher is thinking through issues, and it's not just the video itself, but it's that reflective paper. You see where the teacher is planning out a strategy. How did they accomplish the student learning they were trying to achieve? Why did they get the results they were looking for? And then again, right from the beginning, and I think residencies, as you said, is another way to really look at this as a game changer in terms of mediated entry that we've seen work in all the other professions, architecture, engineering, medicine, and it really needs to come to education to get teachers started on the right pathway from the beginning.
Karen?
Yeah, one of the things that we're working on, and so Phi Delta Kappa has Educators Rising, and the National Board has these standards of professional practice. There are so many assets that we can leverage now, and if you think about teaching as a career-long endeavor, right? So that starts maybe when you're in high school, maybe when you're young and you're an aspiring teacher, you're starting to learn how to interact with children or whatever that is. So we've been thinking about this whole notion of micro-credentials and whether or not we can begin to articulate and lay out for people what is the teaching profession and how can you begin at the beginning, begin at the beginning and progress through your entire career. There are people who have been teaching for 10, 12 years who clearly have things to learn every single day. What are those things and how do we begin to credential those things, offer the opportunity for recognition for those kinds of things? So things like building micro-credentials around teacher leaders, teacher leadership, right? So now here are credentialed people who have that teacher leadership credential. On and on. You can think about all of the students with special needs that come through your classroom for the years that you teach. So if you've been teaching for a number of years and this year you have a student on the autism spectrum, this is the year that you need to learn that and learn how to work on that. And you may join a community of practice. You may read books. You may get mentors. You may have someone come into your classroom. There are lots of different ways, but you are going to figure that out as a teacher. And can we build then micro-credentials that support you and recognize those advancements that you make throughout your career from your beginning, whenever you decide to be a teacher, all the way through your entire career.
So that would be a very differentiated type of.
differentiated, very
How far do you
personal.
think we are from that type of?
Not far. We're working on it now, and I
Yeah.
mean, many people that I've seen today are also very aware of the movement and the opportunities available to us.
And I think it's an excellent way to go back to that, sort of question that I have for, policymakers and governance and anybody that influences education. What are ways to honor, the learning that, and recognize the learning that teachers do that they take on themselves because they are confronted with a problem of practice that they have an urgency to learn about. And that drives a lot of teachers. And so you could imagine that, a micro-credential would be a way to do that. One could imagine that you rethink your certification requirements to move away from, well, you need 6 hours, or 135 credits or whatever that is, to this is what you need to do. You need to just demonstrate how you developed and executed expertise to advance student learning. That's going to be part of what you submit as you, re-up your credential for professional learning. Changes things, very differently for that. But I was going to say, I think that teacher preparation is ripe right now, and while there's a lot of controversy over, how the HEA regs will be implemented, I think that there's promise within them for some change, certainly around the attention paid to clinical preparation. I know that the chiefs, Council of Chief State School Officers, have really taken it upon themselves to try to guide their agencies to do much smarter policy around licensure, the program approval and evaluation of the programs that prepare teachers and leaders in their states, and to use data to make some real performance-based indicators and some real evidence to inform those decisions. So I think that there certainly is this sense from the chiefs and the SEAs that we work with that preparation, first and foremost, has to be practice-rich. I don't know that we would, go on one recommendation that it's got to be a residency program, but preparation has to be filled with multiple opportunities to learn and practice. And, to think about then assessing the performance along the way with feedback. Those kinds of things and it's preparation and development, so you're thinking about these policies along a continuum, so they work together and not, discreetly, where you find later that they, at worst, work against each other. At best, send a mixed message of what's valued, to the profession. So I think there's a lot of promise with the attention to teacher preparation reform right now.
Okay. Yeah, Andy.
Also, in terms of teacher preparation reform. The residencies, we continue to look into residency. NEA is continuing to look into residencies and really seeing what's working and not. The two that get cited, and Seth cited them, the San Francisco teacher residency and the Seattle teacher residency. We also, our department also oversees some innovation grants, and we are seeing more and more of those innovation grants coming in with requests for groups really trying to think about the residency. One very concrete way that NEA has been contributing to the teacher preparation is focusing on the quality and the work of the cooperating teacher. Those are many are members, and we all have had student teachers and work with student teachers. But how to do that well and of high quality isn't in the training programs for most teachers.
Sure.
So we're piloting some cooperating teacher trainings. I'm thinking I need to talk to Karen after this to micro-credential it.
Yeah,
But that's another way that we've been really thinking about how to ensure that every educator for every child is prepared for the classroom.
Okay.
I just want to
Yeah.
add that the importance for the residency programs, because we think about the residency programs where you're really trying to recruit teachers into the system that are reflective of the population. And we've experiencing and continue to experience a major demographic shift in this country of the students that we're working with, and the teaching force doesn't reflect that largely demographically. And then I would certainly say with the whole host of challenges that come along with teaching students who have high poverty or come from homes with high poverty and lots of language diversity, as well as having special needs. And so the residency programs become critically important in really in preparing teachers to go into the workforce with the conditions that they're actually be teaching in, and not in this context that doesn't seem to mirror where they actually land. So having educators who are better prepared contextually, but certainly with the content, but also the context for which they will be teaching in is critically
From the
important.
residency programs.
Yeah, the residency programs.
Okay. Okay. Changing the tone. How would you like to see teacher professional development and support addressed, if at all, in the ESEA reauthorization? Seth, well, I mean, what can be done at the federal level?
I'll say where, the bill is right now, at least, where the Senate bill, I think it seems headed to the floor in a couple weeks, and where that's sort of situated now, what we like about it, what, I think could be made stronger. From the federal government standpoint, how can you create the conditions? How can you create the environment for states and districts to really move forward on a lot of the pieces I think we're talking about today? And I think that leaves some room for discretion in this environment in Title II, but can you make the menu of options pieces that for states and districts to really take a comprehensive approach to how they're building the continuum? They're thinking about in their needs assessment, they're thinking about in their planning of how does their preparation programs, their nearby preparation programs, connect to a residency or novice teacher support in terms of induction, and how does that lead to the accomplished level? How does that, how are you providing an opportunity for leadership opportunities? So again, you have the staffing throughout that system that's providing support to the novice teachers, providing support to the prospective teachers, and allowing other teachers, building the next generation of teachers to go through board certification and become accomplished. I think where we see the falling short is just in the last few weeks, you have actions taken on this part of states in terms of Wisconsin or even New Mexico, where you're allowing out-of-field teachers, with even the approval, and in some cases the department, out-of-field teachers, English teachers to teach history teachers to teach English, math teachers to teach science, math, not a regard for content knowledge, and it's much worse in Wisconsin where you really don't need any content knowledge under the bill that's moving through the legislature there to be a teacher. I think when we look at that and you're at the next, you have a reauthorization every 12 years, it's maybe, it's not the highly qualified definition, which had some exceptions, but how do you not provide some sort of backstop to say to states, that's not how we build a profession, that's not how you can go at it from that, that you have to build in Title II some of these continuum pieces that we're talking about, but then there also needs to be a backstop that says, no, you have to invest in building that continuum. You can't lower the bar to do so.
And I would,
Yeah.
Okay,
Charmaine.
so kind of following on Seth's point, ESEA should require districts and states as part of their plans to specify what this continuum.
I'm sorry, districts and what?
States and
States.
districts to specify as part of their plans what this continuum actually looks like. You should be able to speak to collaboration, collaborative opportunities, whether it be percent. I mean, I think there's a level of specificity. This version of ESEA seems to be highly reliant on simply reporting and transparency. And if that theory of action is true, that by people just having information, they're going to act upon it, then let's give us the type of information we actually need to make it actionable. So what do we know? What is it that we need to know? And how many educators are really being provided substantive opportunities to collaborate, and meaningful professional development opportunities are coming into the system prepared to teach in the classrooms? Those are things that these plans that are supposed to be shared out and broadly available should speak to.
Okay, yeah, Andy.
So rather than think about professional development as this piecemeal Band-Aid that you can put, we're calling for the government to really support professional development opportunities to districts and states that have a clear understanding of the teaching continuum that's been referenced several times. So rather than just these one-shot professional development opportunities, districts and states need to be using the federal dollars to support job-embedded professional development as teachers progress from induction to provisional to professional to accomplished stages of their career. We're also calling for a stronger definition of professional learning so that Title II dollars can flow to the schools to support the individual professional learning needs of the teachers in their context. The teachers know what they need and should have a say in how those dollars are spent. And then finally, we're looking for stronger language supporting the documentation of the impacts of these professional development activities, so that we know, what works and what doesn't work, so that we can replicate and scale what works.
I think that the
There you go.
challenge.
No, please.
No, go ahead. I think the challenge for the organization that I represent, which is Council of Chief State School Officers, is kind of gets at where Seth started, which is, what's the balance of a law that allows flexibility to states to allow them to work with their local context and stakeholders to determine what fits the states, but not allow a Wisconsin, to happen. And so I don't know how that plays out. The other thing that's really important to the chiefs in this conversation about SEA reauthorization for professional learning is that it is first and foremost supportive of the kids that the SEA was intended to focus on, and doesn't get diluted with opportunities for, this SEA was really about doing right by the kids who are continue to be underserved in this country. And so just not losing that focus in SEA in terms of, how we put strong definitions and, open up flexibility for use of the dollars, but tie it back to the purpose of SEA.
Yeah, I just agree with my panelists, could not agree more about maintaining that purposefulness of why we have a federal law. In any case, it is to ensure equity across the country, or promote equity across the country, and make sure that things like Wisconsin don't happen, that we don't have pockets where, because of things that happen in the state, it's allowable to have a very low bar for education. So that is far and above, I think, the main thing we have to keep our eyes on. A couple other things I would say is, I think focusing on competency rather than seat time is one of the things we need to transition to, because there are so many opportunities to learn today. We want to make sure that we are representing those, recognizing those, and giving people credit for those kinds of things. I think the flowing money directly to the teacher, so they have their own sort of wallet that they can spend on professional development, whether it be to bring somebody into their classroom, or whether it be to attend something, or whatever they need. Teachers are all college educated, they're incredibly smart, and we have to make sure that we are lifting that up and listening to that. And I think having money flow to the teacher is the second thing. And the third thing I would say is ensuring that technology is supported throughout the entire thing, so that technology isn't by the way, over on the side, but it is incorporated into every single part of the law, so that every part of it is a teaching moment. Every part of it can be augmenting teachers' abilities with the use of technology.
Yes, Seth, really quick.
Can I just add one thing that I wanted to mention was just as this ESER authorization bill has moved forward, there's been a lot of support among groups for the continuum, and maybe, as it comes forward. I mean, just on this panel alone, you have CCSSO's Our Responsibility, Our Promise, which called a number of these reforms along the continuum. NEA's three-point plan board has been out there with very similar, and there's a coalition of about 100 groups, the Coalition for Teaching Quality, big cross-section of civil rights, disability groups, rural educators, teaching associations as well, that are pushing for this. So you do see the conversation changing, and I think that's important to think about when you think about where SEA was even 20, 30 years ago, where teaching wasn't even thought about as maybe the key lever. Now we're talking about how do you spend that money. We know it's the key lever. Right. There's money that has to be set aside for it. There should be more. But in terms of coming from that respect, I think that's an important point, and parents and public feel the same way. PDK put out a poll just, I think it was in the fall, where 80% of parents across party were saying that board certification accomplished practice is something we want to see more of. 70% wanted to see residency or mediated entry for teachers to have that experience. So I think there's a real coalescing moment, right now where it's reaching there, but it's figuring out how to best make sure states and districts are moving that direction.
Okay. Just a quick note: when Karen mentioned directing the PD funds to the teachers themselves, they were all nodding up here in case you missed that. So, and you also mentioned technology. I want to touch on that briefly, although it's a huge topic. One of the stories we're covering is, and we have been covering, is how many teachers are turning to social media, MOOCs to get professional development that are kind of outside of their school programs, that they may not even getting credit for. Are there opportunities that are being missed in technology and professional development, the way schools are using it? Karen?
So I just have to say that one of my takeaways from the day was Omari, like a couple years ago, people would be calling you a digital native, and now suddenly you're a teacher and you're like, oh, the kids know much more than we do. I was like, what? What is wrong with this? It's not. I think we have this storyline that teachers don't know how to use technology, and it is so not true anymore. Mm-hmm. It is not true. We have teachers of all ages. It's not an age barrier anymore. It's more maybe attitudinal a little bit, maybe a fear and risk barrier. It's also a barrier if kids don't have access and control themselves, because then it's a ton of work for teachers to try to manage technology. So if kids have their own device, then they are going to be powered up. That augments teacher performance. It helps teachers if kids have access. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is looking at professional development for teachers, specifically around the concept of technology. One of the things we can do is start with, if people have this mindset that teachers sort of don't know how to use technology, it's like, I bet 99% of teachers probably use technology for their own personal lives, to shop, to search, to learn, to whatever people do with technology. So if we can take that exact same behavior and knowledge and bring it into the professional realm, totally fantastic. Search, find, learn, interact, connect, find experts, all those kinds of things that we do personally, we can also bring in the professional realm. And then the third, which is a roll up our sleeves and let's just figure this out, is in the classroom figuring out what happens, what is different, what are the opportunities when kids do have access to technology. So it is a different kind of interaction that happens. Kids are empowered to do a lot of the work that the teachers did before. Teachers have brought in lots of resources before. They find things, they bring them into classrooms, they kind of do a lot of the teaching. And now if we flip that, there are a lot of different kinds of things that can happen in terms of interaction. And that does take coaching, mentoring, working with each other, collaborating, figuring stuff out. But if everybody here thinks about, if you wake up in the morning and need to learn something new, what do? Probably somewhere close to the top is going to be, search, Google, Bing, whatever engine you want to use. So I think that's just huge opportunities. And yes, I could go on for too long. Thanks.
Andy, did you want to add?
Yeah, I'm so rarely on a panel where I agree with everyone on this panel. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's find some. I apologize to the audience. This is such a boring panel. Yes, and we heard from the practitioners earlier that we heard over and over about PD and how we know the importance of implementation. You can go and you can hear a great idea, but it's that It's that hearing the idea and implementing it into the classroom where things get lost. And we ideally would have peers, and you'd be able to have that time to try things and to fail and to learn from each other. But technology can play such a role in helping implement and having a digital community. We have multiple affiliates who are working with groups, their teacher voice groups. NEA is, we're actually unveiling this week at our annual meeting that happens next week. But NEA professional practice communities, and it is really aimed to have this online collaboration as you're trying things with your peers. So we're very supportive of online learning, and know that that's what our members and all teachers are craving.
Okay. Do we want to move to audience? Or? Okay, good. I have one last question. I wanted to touch on the point that Andreas made about, so what if you had one thing you could implement, or one sort of process you can implement, what can we do to improve teachers' sense of being valued by society, which is apparently very low right now? What sort of policy thing could be implemented to improve that sense of respect?
I don't think you can mandate respect any more than you can mandate caring, good parenting. I think that this is what I hear from I've gone to so many retirement parties of my teaching colleagues that I started with this year. And in the past, they've typically been really joyous occasions, and they haven't been this year. Because people just tell me over and over that, they're just leaving very sad. Mm-hmm. And when I ask them why they feel that way, it's not because they feel that way in their local community. It is the national story that is told, and the national narrative that started, I think, several years ago with the way we rolled out teacher evaluation systems, that there were bad teachers that had to be getting rid of. All of these things that there's been these unintended consequences of maybe well-intended, policies to create good evaluation systems, but they were rolled out in an accountability system, and there's no way you can tell teachers that it wasn't a rate you and gotcha system. Mm-hmm. Removing tenure, I'm, worked in right to work and, was a union organizer in my early day. Really tenure, with strong labor laws is, I think, a moot issue. But what it says to somebody is, I don't want to guarantee you a job in this profession. I want to take away anything that would perhaps attract you into this profession that you could be valued there. And until we change a national narrative, those are the stories that people hear. And so that's not a policy solution. That is a public relations solution that's got to start in this city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, Andy.
Thank you, Mary Dean. If I could wave a magic wand, it would be to empower our educators. I hear you. Folks are downtrodden. They feel that their profession is not valued. And I think back to Andreas's presentation earlier, where in spite of all these things, was it 84% or something? Only 16% wanted to leave.
Yeah.
Teachers are dedicated. We're in this profession for the students, and I would have the public realize that, and also realize that this is a profession, and as professionals, we are growing and learning. Teaching is difficult. It's not something anyone can walk in and do. I would empower those educators to not empower them. I would let them show that empowerment and pride in the profession.
And so to add to that, agree, and also agree with Amari about that you get stronger by lifting heavy things. We have got to change the story so people see how hard and interesting teaching is. Yeah. The whole rhetoric about thank a teacher, love a teacher, I love my teacher, it is, I think it's necessary but so insufficient. So people just think about the warm fuzziness of teachers, and so then they forget about the deep knowledge and skill that it takes to interact with an entire group of kids every single day. So that storyline, it is a PR campaign. It's something that we should design and develop and dream up and get funded and do. But it's a grand challenge right now, and now is the time to figure that out and do it.
So,
quick follow-ups.
Agree. Really brief. The challenge I always felt at teaching experience is that everyone thinks they can do it. it's like with the people in
Yeah.
our communications team, people think because they can talk, because they can write, because they can tweet. Clearly, I'm now a communications director. And it's the unfortunate part with teaching. I think policymakers need to provide the basic structures and supports, and they honestly need to get out of the way in terms of the how, because that's why we have teachers, that's why we have educators, because they understand what needs to be done. And so the best thing that I think they can do, and it enables everything else that my fellow panelists have said to actually take place, educators can own the profession, and they can do what needs to be done on behalf of kids and elevate it into a status that it actually needs to be, and stop having us who don't do it try to tell you how to do it. So that's what can be done.
I'd agree completely with and just say that I think it's not the working around the edges, and that it has to be that we're looking at the entire system. As I said before, I think that it has to be starting with preparation. That there are models out there. There's this recognition that teaching not only as a statement that it's a profession, but that there are models out there in medicine, engineering, architecture, that we know how to build it, but we have to do the hard work of actually building that infrastructure from the beginning, and making sure that teachers have that opportunity when they get into the leadership position to then grow the next generation of teachers. So I think that would make the big difference.
Great. Do we have time for audience, or is it right about 4 o'clock now? Sorry. I'm sure you could come up and talk to any of the panelists. I want to thank our panelists, though.
So I want to take a moment and say agree, and thank you. This has really been an exciting afternoon, and I think as this last panel was agreeing with one another and lifting up teaching and talking about the work that's ahead, it reminded me of what Secretary Riley said to us when we launched this new initiative about 18 months ago, and that was that he wants this work to be positive, collaborative, and action-oriented. And what you all heard today is exactly why this work needs to happen. We couldn't agree more. The time is right now. This momentum, this agreement, this eye toward an education for every student in this country that is different and positive and really helps them to succeed in whatever endeavor they want to do past school is our mission and our challenge and our absolute must do. And so I thank you all for coming and for being part of a great afternoon. I thank all of our panelists. And I want to thank my NCTAF staff colleagues, Elizabeth Foster, give a wave, please. Ryan Brookshire, please. Sharon Saez, who's not here. Aiden, who's out at the registration desk. There's a lot of folks that go into making an event. We feel very fortunate to have so many partners here with us. And we thank you all for your time today.